Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to our next installment of Interview with an Exorcist. My name is John Barnwell, and I'm here with Dr. Douglas Gabriel, a man of a great many unusual experiences, many bordering on the realm of high strangeness, as they say. But today we thought it'd be fun to revisit some of his early adventures in being a consultant for Hollywood. Douglas, how are you?
I'm doing great, John. Now, someone might ask, what in the world, in an interview with an exorcist, why are we getting to Hollywood? And what does this have to do with exorcism? Well, here's the deal. When I was a consultant, as you have been, to Hollywood or HBO or whoever, they usually take it and really mess up whatever you give them. But one thing is for sure, there's an obsession with materialism. And so what do they want to know about? Things. They want to know about the spear of destiny. They want to know about the Holy Grail. They want to know about Shiva stones. They want to know about the crystals of Atlantis. They want to know about the crystal skulls. They want to know all this stuff that leads to what? Somebody, a treasure hunter, in other words, a good capitalist, going and stealing it. I mean, isn't that what the Indiana Jones movies are all about? I mean, really, he steals it from a museum, but isn't he essentially a thief? Isn't he the Han Solo? Really, he's Han Solo, and Han Solo, which I'll talk about in a minute because so many people do know this. We've talked about it before. I was a consultant for Star Wars and wrote a story with Marcia Lucas. Lucas's wife at the time, her name was Griffin before and after that, but literally wrote the third treatment for the movie, which got accepted, and then the final treatment is what you got to see on screen for the first three of the Star Wars movies. But what we wrote for that was nine. It took him 9 movies to get across what was, in essence, maybe 3 pages of writing, which is really, when it comes down to it, the plots of Hollywood movies now can be summarized in one sentence. A really complicated one, maybe 3 paragraphs. Okay, Cloud Atlas. Because there's so many lives going on, you might have to have 3 paragraphs. But when it comes down to it, the pitch for a movie takes they give you like 15 seconds. That's it. If you can't give them what the contrasts are, what the question is, and that's very evident from the beginning, then it's not going to go anywhere because they know that the level of the people watching movies is basically third grade. Now, this obsession with materialism has led to strange TV shows like Warehouse 13 or The Librarian or the many versions where what do? They go get the things. And then the things have some kind of magic power and spiritual power to them. Well, we've been talking about the spear of Longinus. We've been talking about the spear of all the different spears that go under the heading of the spear of Longinus, the different versions of it. We've been talking about the Holy Grail. We've talked about lots of different things. And really, when it comes down to it, I want to make it perfectly clear you don't need any of those things. Those things are in you. The spear of Longinus is your nerve system. The Holy Grail is your blood system. And the Holy Spirit, you could even say, or, these things that they give divine credence to, can actually be found in the human body. So the human body is divine. But when you have someone who's been possessed, oh my, in every case I know of, every single case, there's objects involved. Okay, you've heard me say this story numerous times. The girl who had the comb that would comb her hair while she just sat there, levitating in the bed. And then she'd make the bed move, and then she'd make things fly around the room. So when it comes to poltergeists or possessions, yes, what you would call poltergeist, things flying around the room. Oh, this is extraordinarily common, very common. A priest can walk into a room, and because of the stories I know from Father William, who trained me, and the other exorcists he worked with, they walk in the room and they're assaulted immediately. Some things are thrown at them. That's why you have to go in when they're quiet. You don't wake up a sleeping possessed person until you're ready and you're prepared and you're ready to be assaulted. And so this stupid movie that's out, The Pope's Exorcist, is what we're talking about. Hollywood taking one of the worst chapters of the Vatican, which is their pathetic obsession now with possession and exorcism, which most of which is fake, but it makes them more important, doesn't it? You need them now. You need these priests because there's so many, 70,000 exorcisms were done last year in the Catholic Church, individual exorcisms. That's actually more like 80,000. But the point is, most of them are fake and most of the priests doing it are fake. But when you see someone who is possessed, in most cases, they have something in their hand. And the guy who says that he did all these exorcisms says that nails will pop out of their mouth. That, okay, these kind of things, no, the nails of Christ have not popped out of anybody's mouth. But does a person who's possessed vomit, even though they don't eat? They oftentimes don't eat for long periods of time, and they can projectile vomit across the room. Where did all that stuff come from? And usually what they want to do is get the cross that the priest is holding. And then I'm not going to tell you what they do after they get it. But if they get that cross, they're going to make that priest really freak out with what they're going to do with it. And then you see all this weird stuff going on, and you cannot mistake really a truly possessed person because they turn into animal forms right in front of your eyes, screaming and yelling, doing horrible things. So one day, Werner Kloss turns to me at the Waldorf Institute in Detroit in the bookstore, and he says, Doug, answer the lady's questions on line 2. And I go, okay, that's usually about how much warning I had when Werner set me up for something, right? I answer the phone, and the woman, she starts in. I actually kind of made a list of some of the things she wanted to know about. Well, I can remember them. First thing she wanted to know is, what is this about poltergeists? And I'm like, you want to know about poltergeists? And is there a reason you're asking me? And she said, Werner said you know everything and you know all about this. So and Werner told me, tell her what she wants to know. So basically, folks, I told Kathleen Kennedy, who I did not know was Kathleen Kennedy at the time, Spielberg's assistant, later Lucas's right hand, and then of course the head of Lucasfilms, and Kathleen Kennedy has made 78 movies. Okay. And some of them are some of the biggest movies of all times. Anyway, that's who's on the phone. I don't know that. She asks these questions. Can you tell me about poltergeists? Can you tell me about possession? Can you tell me about this stuff? And then this led into maybe a 2.5-hour conversation. My boss told me to tell what she wanted to know. And then I sold her some books, and some of the books were hypnotism, and that the Theosophy one in GA 52 about hypnotism, somnambulism. In there is mentioned poltergeists, and I said, "Oh yeah, Steiner talks about that." So I pulled out the book and I read this section. Oh, can you send me that book? Yeah. Okay, can you send me anything I made reference to? She said, "Send me the book. I'll pay for it." And so I started what was a very long relationship with the person who, in the first conversations, I didn't even know her name. I didn't even know who I was talking to. I thought it was a friend of Werner's. And so, I thought I had to be very nice to this person. And so she called, and then this is very strange. This is very strange because after that, sometime after that, and by the way, she kept calling afterwards. The other thing she wanted to know about, are UFOs real? Are there aliens? I understand I guess Werner must have told her some crazy things, but I told Werner all about myself when I didn't want him to have any surprises. I told him about my time in the NSA, encountering UFOs, and being a psychic, being trained as an exorcist. I was still at that point a Jesuit associate. Blah blah blah. I told him all that, so he might have mentioned that to her. So she goes, about UFOs? What about them? So I'm going, well, most of them are spiritual. Some are this and that, and on about UFOs and what that would be like, right? And I didn't know why she was asking all these questions, but I did know she was taking notes. And then she'd ask about poltergeist. We went into great deal of explanation for things like, I wrote this down. Matter of fact, y'all know I never use notes. This is so complicated. I made a full page of notes so that I could attempt to do this in the right order, because I've never figured out the order, or it didn't actually perfectly make sense until yesterday when I had to write this down. And That explains so much. I went to Wikipedia and I looked up the dates of everything, and then I put it in a timeline. As Tile always says, put it in a timeline, then you can understand it. So she asked about exorcisms, poltergeists, changelings, abductions, ghosts, talking to the dead. And then we got into a long conversation about Blavatsky and Steiner and their clairvoyance and their so on and so forth. And then we got into talking about, and you'll recognize this theme, that the television brings the dead, or the realm of basically Kamaloka, basically the eighth sphere, really, it's what it is, into this life. And young children, if they get too close, I was describing within 8 feet, the cathode ray tube bombards their pineal gland and blah, 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 makes it, but you can literally, and if you don't believe me, I'm telling her, go up and touch a TV screen, because I was in a war against TVs all for a long, long, long time. Go touch the TV screen. You feel that static electricity. You know what that is? That's angels falling into the earth and dead people trying to rise up from the subnatural realm of the eighth sphere. And she's like, this is the stuff I want. And so, I go, oh, you want sensationalism. And so we started this relationship. And literally at one point, which is will be the next topic, down the line, she was paying me $100 an hour to talk to me on the phone. And I was selling her thousands of dollars worth of books. And if you don't believe me, go to Skywalker Ranch, go to their library, open any book, and it'll have the Mayflower bookshop stamp in it or the Waldorf Institute stamp in it. I stamped those books as I sold them to her. And John knows all about this because I discussed it with him as these things were going on, but I thought nothing of it. I didn't like Star Wars movie. I hated it. It killed a lot of people. It wasn't the way I wrote it. It was supposed to be going towards the feminine. Don't get me started. But I have here all the evidence, and in the URLs of the show notes today, you can see some of the evidence of the proof of what I'm saying, because in Europe, oh yes, I'm very famous. I'm the Waldorf teacher who wrote Star Wars, which is not true. I worked with Marcia Lucas and helped write it, but I wasn't a Waldorf teacher at the time. I was training. And there were other people in the room. They didn't say much. But yes, I did have something to do with that. But what we want to talk about is, why is it any spiritual idea that goes to Hollywood turns out to basically be the opposite?
Yeah. Great story. I mean, I've heard it so many times, but every time he comes up with some new factoids. Yeah, Hollywood has a long history with the esoteric. I mean, there's Michael Chekhov, he was one of the people in the circle around Rudolf Steiner, and he's, of course, the nephew of Anton Chekhov, the playwright. And Michael Chekhov was brought to the United States by Leo Zagami's grandmother, actually. And he started his first school with her help in Connecticut, and then they opened a school in California, and a lot of notable people like Marilyn Monroe and even the list is so long I don't want to get it. We do that some other time, but there's just a long history of that. But on the other side of the equation is the shadowy side of the esoteric that's become so dominant lately, and that demoniacal expression, that visage of Hollywood today is it's all this dark, shadowy stuff, and it really has to do with materiality, and when you get into understanding that which is of esoteric Christianity, shall we say, that what you're getting into is not just the stuff, but the beings behind is the important part of the equation. Of course, the leader of which is Christ. And so it's interesting to see the inversion that happens in these types of scenarios. And you're right about the brevity. I mean, I was talking to a HBO consultant that I know, and I gave him this little pitch, and he goes, too long. Oh yeah, that's right. I'm going to be talking to pinheads or something. It's like so. Continue on, please. This is very, very enjoyable.
Well, I'm going to tell a story you were involved in, and that was your friend from HBO, whose name I won't say. Oh, yeah, if you play that backwards, you'll hear his name. He asked us to do the God Project. And so Brian Lynch and myself, yourself, and Robert was partially involved in that. We started brainstorming, and eventually Brian went out there a couple times. Did you go with him?
No.
Two people went, whoever it was. Was Bobby with them? I don't remember who. Two people went.
I don't recall.
So anyway, they went out there twice. They wined them, they dined them, they set them up with any girls they wanted. They thought the two who went out there, I forget who it was, thought that was one of the greatest things that ever happened to them because, they were being courted. And we had written down our thoughts called the God Project. How can you prove that God exists? And so we gave, I wrote a bunch of stuff. Brian wrote a bunch of stuff. You contributed, I don't remember what all, but this all got packaged. He went out there. They treated him like a king. They said, it's all set. It's all, man, the money's big. Yeah, it's going to be great. Comes back, goes back again, gives them the documents, the written documents. And that was the last we heard of them until about a year later, a show came on which proved that there was no God. So they took the God Project and made it the Ungod Project. And literally, I watched the show and I'm going, this is pretty convincing. It would shake up a normal person's faith. Okay, so how did our contribution, which was noble and honest and good and pure and correct and true, get turned into that? Because I swear there's a demon that controls Hollywood. Because when I did find out, here's a funny thing. I'm not sure you were there that day that Thibodeau and I were watching the TV for something. We always watch Star Trek, so it might have been, I don't remember why. But here comes Steven Spielberg, and he's being interviewed about the movie Poltergeist. And he said, and they say, where did you get the inspiration for Poltergeist? He says, I got it from the Austrian scientist and philosopher, Dr. Rudolf Steiner. And we just about fell over. That was it. I mean, we just, whoa, what are you talking about? I don't even know if I'd gone to see the movie Poltergeist until then. And then I'd made sure to see it. And I'm going, whoa, this is strange. It's so uncanny. That woman who played the little woman in Poltergeist, she looks like Blavatsky and she's a psychic. And she, like the description I gave my friend on the phone and the whole description of everything about graveyards and so on and so forth are in that movie. It still didn't dawn on me that the person I was talking to on the phone was basically giving these ideas to Spielberg, right? And so we said to each other, that's it. We have to get Spielberg's ear. We have to get his attention. We have to get Spielberg to do some cool movies about anthroposophy and spirituality and get him up on the silver screen.
And that was Kathleen Kennedy on that project, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Well, that's the thing that people might not get. At the Mayflower, we were the largest esoteric bookstore in the world, and holistic healing and all kinds of history of ideas and astrology, and we had everything, and it was huge. Literally, the old store was twice the size of Weiser's in New York, and the new store is twice the size of that. So we had people coming all the time, and we didn't know who they were, and people would ask us questions, and I have somebody who I remember as a customer, and they come back, a year later, and they're holding a book in their hand, and they're thanking me. It's like, oh, okay, cool. And so we didn't make a big deal out of all of this type of things. But it is funny in retrospect. And yes, it does tend to be that in demonus deus inversus. The demon is God inverted. And so you have this whole way of dealing with things out there that tends to want to give you the shadow version. And that's troubling. I mean, most of my life, I didn't own a television set, okay? And I had no use for it. And And now, in retrospect, that's probably a good thing because there was that much less programming going directly into my brain. But in any regards, when you start looking at, well, going to the Poltergeist again, Julian Beck was in that movie. He was that old, scary guy with the scraggly gray hair. And he was the heir of the Beck fortune, and he was the founder of Living Theater in Europe. He was an avid student of Aleister Crowley, the infamous self-proclaimed beast, And so Hollywood is no stranger to that type of scenario. I mean, Del Close used to come buy books from me. He was a founder of Second City in Chicago. And so that whole cast of characters, Saturday Night Live crowd and all that, were his students. And when he'd come to town, he'd go to Lycée International, which is a theater school that took over a former, I guess, junior high in Birmingham. But I would go there and I'd sit next to him, and there'd be, hundreds of people down there, and I'd be up there at the director table with him, and he'd be having people assume God forms. It's like something you do in ritual magic. But instead of assuming God form, he says, watch this. And the guy gets up on stage and he says, okay, you're a rasher of bacon. And so the guy had to spontaneously put that forward convincingly. And so it's really, Hollywood is very, very bizarre. I've been in the music business and I've been around Hollywood characters, and well, the music business is even worse, actually.
The Mayflower was, let's just say it bluntly, an occult bookshop. And when you say occult, to some people, that's, spiritual esotericism in the Western tradition merged with the Eastern. And you say others, and it's black magic. And you go to Hollywood, and what will happen? You're going to run into black magic. First time I went to Hollywood, I'm strolling down somewhere, and I'm like being pulled into this. I'm like following some strange thing. It wasn't nice, but I was following it because it was so strong. And I walk into Anton LaVey's black magic shop. And who's sitting back there? Anton LaVey. And I just walk straight in. I walk back to where these curtains were, and I look, and he goes, I've been waiting for you. What took you so long to get here? And I'm like, oh, this is getting weird, very, very weird. And then he started talking about magic and all this stuff and what it's like to be a clairvoyant, as if he could clairvoyantly read my mind, blah, blah. So what happens? They get into all of the very, very dark magic, the dark occultism. That's why they're all obsessed with astrology too. They want to know the future. When you make a bunch of money in a movie, the number one thing, and I've done lots of readings for people who've been involved in Hollywood, what number one thing they want to know is how much they're going to make on the next thing, because they're living in a house they can't afford. They bought it with the money from the last movie, and they're now in debt. So you meet these people and you find out they don't have any money. And they'll do anything for money. And as we know, all the children are abused in Hollywood, practically all of them. All the young girls are this, what's it called? The casting couch syndrome. So I knew that it was bad. I didn't mean to get caught up in this. When I worked with Marcia Lucas, again, it was because Werner turned to me and said, go work with her. Later, I found out that she was a friend of Marcia Lucas. Marcia told me that. Kathleen told me. Marcia Lucas is friends with Kathleen Kennedy. I didn't know that until years and years later. I didn't even know Kathleen Kennedy was associated. When she told me her name, eventually, it meant nothing to me. I didn't understand. Her name wasn't front on the movie. I didn't go to movies. I didn't watch TV. I hated it. So here I was pulled into these things as a consultant. Why? Because evil does not have a good imagination, but spiritual people have overactive imaginations in many cases. And certainly all I was doing was taking a very bad second treatment of Star Wars and turning it into a third treatment. Character development, I wrote out all those things. I wrote out the story like a fairy tale. So after I'd studied it, and Marcia said, okay, let's just start from the beginning of it after I read it. Let's start from the beginning and just go through it step by step. I said, no. Throw the whole thing out. Throw the whole thing out. Han Solo was a fish in the second treatment. That's what I had to work with. Luke was called Luke Planet Killer or something, and he had a dog. And that was the most interesting part of the whole story. He had a dog. But remember, what was the story about? And this is my point. Horrifying materialism. When George Lucas wrote his first movie, it was called THX 113, the worst sci-fi movie in history. Watch it. No, I don't recommend you watching it. It's that bad. You can get it by going to Amazon Prime. And it's all about a robot told completely from the point of view of a robot. Are you getting where I'm going here? How could you make a movie about a robot? What is Star Wars about? It wasn't about Luke. It wasn't about Leia. They weren't brother and sister. That was my idea. There were no kyber crystals. There were no lightsabers. There was no Darth Vader. Well, there was this character who was like Darth Vader who was really pathetic. But what was it really about? 3CPO and R2D2. The story was completely told when I got it in my hands from the point of view of the two robots. There was no character development. There was no dialogue. It was pathetic. The whole plot was he shows up, he goes into space with his dog, shoots up a bunch of people, finds some aliens, gets the crystal, gets the girl, comes back. That's it. And encounters things like Han Solo or Mink Yodo, which was a mouse and a fish and all these aliens who were animals. It was a pathetic story. So people, after they saw it, what did they say? An anthroposophist wrote this. Darth Vader is Ahriman. The evil emperor is Lucifer. Come on now. Luke is in between. And what's Luke? He's the son of Ahriman. He's born to the prince of darkness, or the world. And then they were twins. So I took the whole stupid love story and turned it around. So, they kissed at first in the story, and then they found out they're brother and sister, but they're twins of who? Ahriman. We were born to Ahriman. And we needed what? Spiritual training. And where does the spiritual training come from? When he's asked this, Lucas says, "Oh, I got it from." At one point he says one thing, another point he says another. But he said he got it from Chiaroscuro's The Dark Fortress. He got it from Flash Gordon. He got it from what's the guy's name who did the Journey of the Hero, that wonderful series with Joseph Campbell.
Joseph Campbell. Yeah, he made very significant contributions to the storyline, according to what I've heard. And so that's usually what gets talked up is Joseph Campbell's involvement, and you get lost in the shuffle.
Well, it doesn't matter. I wanted to be lost in the shuffle. But when the movie first came out, to prove what I'm saying, look at the URLs. You'll see pictures from Highland Hall Waldorf School, where Werner was in the teacher training program before he came to Detroit and before I became his student. And they tried to give all Waldorf schools the right to do a pre-airing of the movie and charge whatever you wanted, $100 a seat. Because you remember the furor around Star Wars? People went nuts before the first movie came out. They lined up overnight and blah, blah, blah. The Waldorf schools who don't like movies said, no, that's Ahriman. That's evil. There's a lot of killing. There's a lot of chopping people up. We don't do that. So they told them no, which would have made them millions of dollars, okay? It would have made every Waldorf school a ton of money. But the point is, then some of the people who were in the movie were at Highland Hall, and so they had this celebration, and you can see the proof of it there, and these celebration they had. Why? Because they were thanking Werner. I don't even know if Marcia Lucas remembered my name. It doesn't matter. They were thanking Werner for letting his Waldorf students help write this adult fairy tale. And it turned into an adult fairy tale with music. And, I even recommended who they could use for the music scores and this and that. And so, blah, blah, blah. The point is that it took 9 movies to get the bottom line of the story, which was 3 pages long when I got done writing it. And in the end, what happens? Luke transcends. But it wasn't Luke who was supposed to transcend. It was supposed to be Leah. So what happens in the eighth and ninth movies? A woman pops up who somehow can hold his lightsaber, so he must be some his blood or whatever, you can't tell. And then the world tree is there, and that was the whole point. They would go to the place where the world tree was, and they would read what the leaves of the tree said when the leaves would fall down. Now, in the movies, they showed those leaves being put in a book, but then they burnt up the tree and they burned up the books. Thanks. Really great storyline. Really. No, the people who here's, you want the real story? The closest story to what I wrote was written later by Alan Dean Foster, who's very famous. He's helped them a lot. He writes all the books. So when the first movie was done, a bunch of books were written. What were the books based on? George Lucas will tell you he wrote those stories. He wrote movie 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. No, he didn't. He took it from Alan Dean Foster and a woman who was a ghostwriter. He says, no one really knows much about this ghostwriter. And he wrote, Alan Dean Foster wrote, The Splinter of the Mind Eye. What is that? Those are the calcium carbonate crystals that I wrote into the first story that are in your pineal gland that cause you to have a toroidal field around your head, around your heart, and below in your chi. And when the three merge, nothing can hurt you. Nothing can penetrate you. Anybody can attack you. It doesn't matter. And if you want, you simply turn it into a mirror, and whatever attacks you goes right back to the source that it came from and hurts them. And so you don't even incur the karma. You just become a mirror. Well, that's what you have to do to be an exorcist. So I was describing being an exorcist. So later on, as I start talking to her on a very regular basis while I'm a student at the Waldorf Institute, and then I find out her name's Kathleen Kennedy, I paid no attention to the credits. I didn't know. I never watched TV. I had no idea. So I had no idea that Poltergeist had come from those conversations, been given to Spielberg. I had no idea, and this really started blowing my mind when I realized this, that when Spielberg started, his first big movie was, of course, Jaws, a horror movie. His movies are terrible. Here's the whole plot for one of his first movies, which I can't remember. Guy in a car makes a guy in a truck mad at him. Guy in truck chases guy in car till one of them dies. There, whole movie. He had a movie called 1941, which all the big stars, Dan Aykroyd and all these people were in it. It was the worst movie ever made. But if you look at it, you go, oh, I get this kind of shock treatment in terms of editing. Where'd they get that? Marcia Lucas invented that type of film editing.
Well, there you have a good example of a short presentation. You go into the office and they say, okay, give me your pitch. And you say, well, a guy in a car.
Well, what did Seinfeld do? He says, I'm going to do a new show. And they said, well, what are you going to do? Guys in cars going to get coffee. And it was a very successful series. That's what it was. Because he collects cars.
Yeah, and then Larry asked him, well, what are they doing? He said, well, nothing.
Yeah, nothing. That was another Seinfeld. They go and they said, what's the series about? Nothing. Absolutely, George Costanza. Absolutely nothing. Nothing? Great idea. And what is that? That is now reality television. What is it about? Nothing. Who are the actors? Nobody. What do they get paid? Nothing. You even put them on Lost Islands and make them put their life on the line. And what do they get? Their 15 minutes of fame, because that's the thing. In the old days, remember when we used to be on cable and people would see us in the street? They'd go nuts. We're stars. I saw you on TV. You go, yeah, so what? You want to be there tonight? We're going tonight. You can come too, because nobody watches except, I guess, you.
Yeah, it's funny. But
so people go crazy over all this stuff. But anyway, I wasn't concerned about 15 minutes of fame. So then this is what I realized. Oh, my Lord. In 1977, Spielberg became huge because he wrote, after Jaws, which was a terrible movie, Close Encounters of a Third Kind. What did Kathleen ask me about? Ad infinitum. aliens, visitations, what would they look like? I must have talked to her for hours about UFOs because I had a lot of experiences with them because for some reason I end up being there, whether they're US made military ships or just by coincidence or going to the places where elemental beings manifest. So I'm describing all this to her and I'm thinking, man, I'm telling her everything I know. Here we go. So then I find out today or yesterday, 1977, the first collaboration was after good old Lucas did American Graffiti and got an Academy Award for what? For doing Happy Days in a movie? That was a terrible movie. How did he get an Academy? I look at that movie and I go, why? Why? There's nothing even redeemed. There's nothing new. There's no dialogue. They're dancing. Okay, whatever. It was a period piece, I guess. So at that point, he runs into Spielberg because Kathleen Kennedy's been working with Spielberg. And that's how Spielberg got the idea for Poltergeist. As a matter of fact, Spielberg said he wrote Poltergeist. He didn't produce or direct it. He wrote it. Incorrect. He's never written any of those things. And we all know that, and he knows that. So why did he say he wrote it? Because he took it from Kathleen Kennedy, his assistant, who with her husband, Frank Marshall, had started Amblin Entertainment. And you always see AMBLIN in all these things because they are associate producers and participate in this stuff. So they got together. And how did they get together? Waldorf. That's how they first got together. They were, now, mind you, Kathleen Kennedy and George Lucas have never contacted me, but they've contacted lots of people I know to sue them because they told the story wrong, because they told one tiny part of it wrong. So I had to be very careful. You'll find lots of videos about this. You'll also find the book of the guy who wrote the creation of Star Wars with Lucas. He hated Lucas, most people did. And then he wrote another book called The True Story, which chapter 2 is all about me. And I spent hours on the phone talking to that guy because he always knew there was a source of this. And when I could prove it, because people who were there, and Marcia then finally said yes. Marcia was under some kind of agreement because George, of course, divorced her. And she had a child at that time or two. And they were in the Marin Waldorf School. So if you say George Lucas had a child in the Marin Waldorf School, he's going to sue you. Don't do that. It's not true. He hung out there. Harrison Ford had a child there. Spielberg had a child there. They all met there. And where did they do Poltergeist? Now, I may get this wrong. I knew it a long time ago because I was told this by the people involved. But the house that was used for Poltergeist, I believe, was Harrison Ford's house. And Spielberg saw Harrison Ford coming to pick up his child one day, and he says, I'm doing a movie, and you're the guy I need to be Han Solo. And he's like, I'm an out-of-work actor. I'll do whatever part you want. That's how he got hired. And Lucas, didn't really go to the school much, but Marcia was connected to it. And then, of course, later on down when they all went down to LA, they were connected to Warner and all that stuff. So then I find out that after they got together, the Kathleen Kennedys shared between them. So Lucasfilms, basically, she starts running Lucasfilms and the Spielberg things. Well, some of the Spielberg things, I should say.
Now, she, with Frank Marshall. Now, isn't he formerly with Penny Marshall? I believe, yeah, the a noted producer and so
he's a big producer. Actress. That's all I know.
Yeah. Fascinating story. And when you start digging in here and you see the modus operandi that goes back to what Douglas was saying in the very beginning, that they always want to take it and connect it to the stuff, to the physicality. And that's the key and that unlocks the door on materialism. And that what we're seeing today in media is this absolute tyranny of materialism that doesn't leave any room for the super sensible, apparently. Okay. And it's funny because if you go to the work of Rudolf Steiner, who Douglas and I have spent many, many years, and this is the context in which we're talking about with the Waldorf School, with all these individuals, is that Rudolf Steiner had said that in the earlier periods of human history, that Names were derived from spiritual beings through inspiration. And that the important thing was the impulses that were coming from the spiritual world. But as mankind evolved toward the turning point of time, the incarnation of Christ, these faculties were declining, and they would go to more extreme measures to be able to maintain a rapport with something outside of the physical world. For example, mummification in ancient Egypt. That was a way of having a relationship with these particular moon spirits that would inspire individuals through the in-breath in the early epochs. But now that we passed the turning point of time with the incarnation of Christ, now we're in a period of outbreathing and building the future of Earth evolution, literally out of that creativity of heart force merged with the pineal pituitary input, so that we can create the moral imaginations, moral inspirations, and moral intuitions that will build our future. So that's what Douglas is trying to do. And what they're doing is they're taking it and they're turning it on its head.
And I should have known better. Because when has Hollywood ever did anything that wasn't sex and violence and control and demeaning of women? And don't even get me started. But anyway, also, if you want to read what I gave them about the moral question of UFOs, what are you going to do when an alien shows up who has more powers than the people on Earth? Are we going to turn him into a messiah? Well, Spielberg actually took that and made a movie which never got produced. Why? Because it was too good of a question, called Night Skies. And so then he did, of course, Close Encounters later on. That was in 1977. So early on, he was obsessed with UFOs, just like she was obsessed about getting me to give every detail you can about it. Later on in 82, he did E.T., which became famous. And what is that? That's Night Skies turned into a Disney movie, which is the extraterrestrial comes, and we don't know what to do with him, and we treat him bad, and we kill him, and we cut him up so we can investigate who they are. Basically, that's what humans are going to do, right? So the question is, why would an alien come here when we already know what they're going to do? And so E.T. was the same thing as Night Skies. And now let's go over Raiders of the Lost Ark was about the Ark of the Covenant. We told them where it was. It's in Oxum. Queen of Sheba brought it back from Solomon, at least a copy of it, and it's in the temples there that are in the ground that are solid rock made into a cross. And then they wear little copies of it on their head for celebrations and and all of the different temples have a copy of it, but the real one, do you think that's what they focused on? No, they focused on that it was there and that the Nazis could get it. Why the Nazis? Because everybody will say, even in the last movie, which I just watched yesterday, he gets ready to punch a Nazi. That's like the number one treatment note in the screenplay is punch the Nazi. Okay, it's just sad. And who is the Nazi? His name is Otto Rahn. He was hired by Hitler to go after the Holy Grail, to go after all these different things, the Ark of the Covenant, so on and so forth, the Shiva stones, the crystal skulls. And then they brought them back to a secret castle where the SS conducted rituals using the things that Otto Rahn brought back. So did Hitler want those things? Yes. Did Otto Rahn go after them? Yes. Can you read about this? Yes, he's got a book or two. I've read them. And there's even an insinuation that our grandfather of our teacher, so Werner's teacher, Walter Johannes Stein, perhaps knew Otto Rahn because he was involved in the war and he was a spy on both sides and he did all this amazing stuff. So did he know Otto Rahn? I don't know. But the point is, it's a fact that Otto Rahn and Hitler and the Thule Society was obsessed with these things. And that's the reason in the Spear of Destiny it said Rudolf Steiner was the white magician fighting Hitler, the black magician. Hitler had the spear, and then he made a copy of it and sent it to the Arctic, and forget all that. The point is that they were obsessed with these things. Anything occult, anything that had physical power in a physical object, okay? Raiders of the Lost Ark, that was about what? The Ark of the Covenant. And then came the Temple of Doom. What was that about? Two things. It was about skulls because they were at that time, that was in 1984, before in 2008, Sci-Fi Channel did a whole expose on the crystal skulls of Mitchell Hedges, a guy named F.A. Mitchell Hedges. Said he found one like the one in the British Museum, and then blah, blah, blah. And then there's 13 of them. This, the story goes, he lived in Mexico. He picked up an old Maya Aztec reference to crystal skulls. Said that when you grab all 13 of them, you pull them together, you're going to have what appears in the movie in 2023. Oh, no, which is the one? Oh, that's the Crystal Skull. The Kingdom of the Crystal Skull was in 2008. Same time. And so this was years after I gave her the story of this called Sunseed, which was written. It's written out. I gave it to her and said, put this on the big screen. Oh, they turned it into such a mess. I couldn't even I had to watch it twice to go, oh, now I get it. Because the story of the Sunseed is very simple. It's the same thing as the Temple of Doom. Down in South America, in between Cuzco and Lima and out towards Machu Picchu, there is a cave, and it's supposedly filled with gold. And this gold is there because it's going to be used to save the earth at some point in some special way. So I wrote this story about it because why? I experienced it as an intuition. I thought it was real. But anyway, and then later I meet the son of Hiram Bingham because, they'll say Indiana Jones is Hiram Bingham. No, he wasn't. But I met Hiram Bingham's son or grandson. Might have been his son. Anyway, and he told me all these stories about Hiram Bingham. And then they'll say that it's Roy Chapman Andrews. No, it's not. Look into his history. That's not what he did. And then they'll say that it's Sir Leonard Woolley. No, it's not. Here's who it is. It's me. I kept telling her stories of the way I went to these places, and pretty soon she would call me Detroit Doug. Indiana Jones, Detroit Doug, goes to the pyramid. And the first story is supposed to be about the pyramid because that's one of the first stories I told her. But it didn't have a bang, and you didn't get to walk out with something special that was physical, that would have power over the earth. Remember, this is all about hegemony, having the occult power to rule the world, whether it's the Spear of Destiny, the Holy Grail, whether it's the crystal skulls, whether it's on and on. It's all materialistic, or what's called spiritual materialism. It's terrible materialism. And none of those objects, I told them to go after the begging bowl of Buddha. Do you think they did that one? No. I told them to go after the real Shiva stones. You think they did that? No. They said that the Shiva stones lit up like the crystal skulls. And then when they went after the crystal skulls, it was 12 master beings who went into that cave in Cuzco. It wasn't 12 crystal skulls that then turn into aliens and then make the UFO come out of the ground and shoot off into the sky. It was supposed to be a section that was built out of all of this gold that was sucked into the sun because of a black hole on the sun, and because of coronal mass ejection that loosened it. And this whole thing, I was trying to get people ready for the fact that we need to pay attention to the sun. And so I wrote this story, but I thought with the 12 people who went there, those were 12 people I knew, and that I was like one of their servants or something. I was like the Sherpa for Les Collins. The way I saw it, I was Les Collins Sherpa, okay? And Les Collins, that's why he's laughing. Les Collins is the most powerful person you'd ever want to meet on the earth. And I was just I carried his bags, basically.
Well, yeah, there's so many phonies. There's got to be a real one somewhere. But yeah, when you start looking under the hood and you see the intimate relationship between the shadow community, so to speak, the underground community, the intelligence community, and all of that in Hollywood, the level of consultancy, which is why, if you go on Netflix, half the movies are about people working for the NSA or the one of the intelligence organizations, usually British, and that whole idealization. But even if you go back to the movie you mentioned regarding UFOs, because Close Encounters, because the guy at the end who ends up playing the music back and forth to the UFO, well, that's like a a version of this guy, Jacques Vallée. And Jacques Vallée is an interesting character in and of himself. He's most famous for his book, Passport to Magonia, From Folklore to Flying Saucers from 1969. But he had close ties in that he worked on the Network Information Center for ARPANET, which was the precursor to the modern internet. And he was a staff engineer of SRI International's Augmentation Research Center. So it's right in the thick of it. And he co-developed the first computerized map of Mars for NASA way back in 1963. So there's this ongoing thing. I mean, if you go, I've talked about it before, but you go to Laurel Canyon, if you keep driving up Laurel Canyon, you'll end up at Lookout Mountain. But there'll be a fence. They won't let you go up there. Why? Because that's one of the intelligence outposts in the LA area. And so you have a lot of those people hanging out down at the Cat and the Fiddle, the British pub down at near the opening, going into the Laurel Canyon. But of course, it's moved since into Hollywood, and just a really strange situation. It was really cool back then. But so there's always this whole cast of characters intimately tied in. I mean, Walt Disney was regularly getting advanced technology through the NASA program, and it's legendary, his friendship with Werner von Braun. So you can go on. There's no end to the interlinking. There's a whole cottage industry, really, writing books about the subject. And here we are, fortunate to have talking with us today one of the most notable, in my mind, cast of characters involved in that whole scenario, because it's really key in understanding. And there's a long tradition going back in literature, because you can look at the novel writing that was done, like, for example, by a former prime minister of Britain, writing novels involving intrigue and intelligence and all that. So this is not anything new. But if you go all the way back to ancient Rome, whoever controls the narrative, whoever creates the narrative, controls the society. And it's a way of basically trying, it's like herding cats, really.
Absolutely. Now,
Benjamin Disraeli was the prime minister. I didn't bother telling you, but he wrote they're good novels too.
Oh yeah. So I only realized yesterday, I think it was, that in 1999, Kathleen Kennedy either produced or directed The Sixth Sense. How many of you remember me just a few times ago saying, the only movie I can tell you that really gets anywhere close to what I experience is two scenes, or a movie and a scene in another one, which someone then quoted what the movie was, the scene. And it's when somebody dies, what happens to them. But there was a movie that was so accurate. The whole time I'm watching this movie, I'm going, whoa, this came from an authentic person. This is really real. This is exactly the way it happens. So if you haven't seen The Sixth Sense, that is what a person like me goes through. And what is it they go through? Hell. Because when you see dead people, it's not pleasant. Especially if they had trauma, because they haven't worked through the trauma. So it's just like the movie shows. That's no exaggeration. So that just plug that one in for me. It's like, oh yeah. So basically I did everything I could to educate her on all this kind of stuff. I gave her some good stories that I created, and then she used them and parceled them out. And one of the stories, 3 pages, lasted 9 Star Wars movies, for heaven's sakes. Now the Indiana Jones movies, well, we went over everything. There was nothing we didn't go over. And it was funny because you could see her as she'd go over the whole big picture of all these things. And then she'd go, okay, now let's focus on this. And she'd take copious notes, and then she'd ask questions. Well, what that would look like? What would that sound like? And she took notes, and she paid me $100 an hour. So I'm not mad at her. Star Wars I did because I was stupid. I didn't care. I still don't care. Secondly, Indiana Jones, I was paid. And I tried to figure it out once when this all started, and a guy from Europe called me and made me famous in Europe by doing multiple articles on the Waldorf teacher who wrote Star Wars. Okay, no. But anyway, there's a URL in the show notes of one of his articles. It's really well written. He quotes me like crazy, accurately quotes me. And then there's a video there that I did. I did numerous videos on this, but someone was interviewing me, and the story seems to go better that way. So anyway, the point is that the Sixth Sense was obviously Kathleen Kennedy carrying forward what was in the Poltergeist. That's what that movie is. Okay, so the Temple of Doom, well, that's the gold and the Cusco and the missing. All this gold, they say the gold came up missing after the conquistadors got there. So where'd they take it? They took it on secret pass from Cusco. The Cusco Cathedral had completely lined with gold on the inside. Boom, it was all gone. And they took it into secret pass. Where did they go? Machu Picchu, the place that Hiram Bingham discovered, in the forest. And why? Because he said, where's the gold? And they go, oh yeah, it's this way. And there's actually places you can go. I know the place to go to get into this cave. Okay. It's famous. I mean, how could you not know? People have walked up to it, walked into it, and never come out. People have gone into it, and then later you find them in another part of the world. They got so much gold, they don't know what to do with it. So does it exist? Yeah, it exists. What's it there for? It's a gift of gold. They say the Anunnakis are coming back to get the gold, the giants, from the Levant. No, nonsense. The gold is here, and the gold is part of the sun. And so what is the gold? The gold is us basically saying to the sun, we know who you are. So the Temple of Doom was nothing more than a treasure hunter going after the cross between the gold of Cusco and the crystal skull. So they merged it into one. And it was a silly movie. But like my son said to me today, Dad, I saw the new Indiana Jones. It was exciting from beginning to end. I'm going, I know, I loved it. Stupid movie. The plot is literally 3 sentences, but man, do they have that whole thing that they do down. So it's exciting. You can, you get sucked in.
I got to have a few minutes before you guys wrap it up. And this is the observation that now we, all of us cats out here, are watching you unfold your own personal journey, spiritual journey, which is the journey of Detroit Doug and Indiana Jones. And so your story has been told before. It's just hidden in these various movies. And so we all have a spiritual path. John has a spiritual path. And I'm sure he could fill all these videos with his spiritual path. We all have it. And Douglas has offered to come on and show you what an authentic, real life Indiana Jones story looks like. Because you've been all those places.
I wish they would have focused on the Palladium. That's the one that I kept saying, please do this. Please do the Palladium. I went to check it out and I'm like, no, Palladium's not here. Where is it? I don't know. Nobody knows. Therefore, it's the only true treasure hunt thing. And then, in 1900, Archimedes' dial got pulled up out of the Mediterranean. And Archimedes' dial, they said, was a computer. They said it was a space thing. It was from aliens. It was everything you can ever imagine and hallucinate. What is it? It's just like Thales, just like, what's the other guy's name? Numerous mathematicians created gear works that replicated the movement of the planets. So it's a planetarium, clear and simple. They now know that after all the study. It's got all these gears, but they call it the first computer. So we told her about that. She was very interested in that. And I said, but what are you going to do with that? You get that. It's nothing more than an astrolabe, so what? You can buy a cheap one. It's an astrolabe that used visible sight lines and things like that. And so they put it in the movie. The last movie is called The Dial of Destiny, and it goes through time. But what do they start off with? An exciting Indiana Jones with the face, his old face, taken from all the old movies, put on his old body now, his current old body, and he gets the Spear of Destiny. Oh yeah, that was one of the first things they asked about. But the Spear of Destiny doesn't have a good ending.
You went on a journey to find the Spear of Destiny.
I totally did.
It turned out okay for you. You see?
Yes. That's a very interesting point. I did go on the journey, and what did I find? What did they find at the end of this after all the big killing, murdering lots of people, things exploding and blah, blah, blah? He picks it up from the case and goes, it's a fake! And instantaneously.
Well, his is a fake.
How do you know it was a fake? Because I told them it was a fake. And nothing you can do can prove that the Maurice spearhead is not created by Pope Leo in the 8th century. We know this, it can be tested. But the spear, I didn't know about the spear of Antioch.
No, you didn't.
And
then
I didn't tell him about that
you're
yet.
right. But yet your story is an actual story. And I hope everybody gets what I'm saying here. John, do you understand? Maybe
Yeah.
you can
Well,
articulate it better.
you're definitely making the point. I mean, the thing is that with this these stories, this lore is within esotericism, within Christian esotericism, we're trying to get to the impulses that are behind the story. And so it's the impulses from the spiritual world that guide one on the quest for the grail. And so the more one is open to that as a possibility, the more successful you're going to be. And if you're just going to approach it with a bunch of abstract plot lines and mind stuff, you're going to come up with the kind of plots that they come up with in Hollywood. I mean, that's just the way it is. You have to be able to have respect for the material, and it's clear they really don't, and that they're really naive in their treatment of it, I think.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And that's what has disappointed me. I didn't care. And then I got concerned and then I hated it. And then I was a materialist. I traveled around to see if I could find the proof of these things. And then in the end, Tyler says to me, I think she might have heard me once, something came on about Star Wars. And I looked to one of my children and said, I had something to do with that. That was always my favorite phrase. I had something to do with that. And they'd look at me like, Dad, you're crazy. Or I'd always say, I've been there, looking at TV or whatever. I saw the Valencia Cup of Valencia once, and I was bragging, and but it was a joke to me, right? And then Tyler just says, "Okay." She called my bluff and said, "Write it down, dude, and get some proof. Find the people who were there. I need the proof, and we need to show people that this was an attempt to bring spirituality into the hypnotic process of movies." Rudolf Steiner says, when movies were created, even in the early days, when people went to the theater house, he said they would sit there, the movie would come on, and they would have no choice but to be almost hypnotized and brainwashed and believe everything they see because of the method of delivery. And that is more than true today. It's that on steroids. So when you look at a movie, you don't willingly when you see a play, you willingly suspend your disbelief, right? For a moment, you say, "Oh, it's a play. I'm going to just get the meaning," right? And these guys aren't liars. They're not con jobs. They're actors and actresses. I can get that. I'm getting the meaning. I get the catharsis of what's going on the stage. Nowadays, you don't get to willingly suspend your disbelief. It steals your belief. You don't even get to address disbelief. When you're watching CGI, you can't tell what's real and what's fake. And so it is hypnotizing you, and beware, it is brainwashing you.
Yes, and so it's a good point at which to interject that you should take advantage of the sigils that are available through Tyler and Douglas. And there's links listed below the videos. You can download them and print them on your computer. Well, here it is. And there you have the healing array, we can call that, and the centering array, balancing out the hemispheres of the brain. So I want to thank everybody for coming by and visiting us, especially Tyler. She always has something great to say. Our wonderful industrious producer. And I want to thank everybody for stopping by, as I said, and thank Dr. Douglas Gabriel for telling yet another remarkable story.